Hi, my name is Aubrey Bryant, and I am the daughter of a recovering addict. My mother, Shelley, will be sharing stories today on the different effects of having an addict parent, which will overall help speak to a larger world problem. 2.2 million children have been affected by the U.S. opioid crisis, which leads to the question of how having an addict parent affects the academic success of their children. Today I want to talk about the factors that can cause a strain on a child's life, therefore affecting their academic success. Before talking about these factors, it's important to understand the commonness and seriousness of this epidemic. The factors I want to talk about today include unstable housing, lower cognitive ability in offspring of addicts, tests that show having an addict parent can cause lower test scores, and the emotional and behavioral effects of parental addiction. I want to introduce my mother, who is a first-generation daughter of an addict.
Hi, I'm Shelley Bryant, and I'm wanting to promote addiction, and I'm here to tell you stories about my life.
Drug addiction is more common than talked about and is a worldwide epidemic. Low income and unstable housing can be a result of this worldwide issue. 8.7 million children in the United States live with at least one parent who has a substance use disorder. This shows the commonness of children living with an addict. You could be unaware of the students in your class that are struggling with this. One of the major effects of having an addict parent is the unstable housing and lack of income that can occur. In an interview of young adults with substance abusing parents, the participants shared that they experience homelessness, lack of money for bare necessities, and the absence of home stability. An article from the medical journal Child Abuse and Neglect shares that these kids had lots of housing transitions, and the more the kids had to move, the more trauma was experienced. I personally dealt with lack of housing stability and unsafe sleeping arrangements when I was younger. For example, one time I had cops knock on my door of the hotel I was staying at with all my belongings in a plastic sack. I still think about this sometimes and now become hyper aware when I hear sirens. Not only can there be multiple transitions and relocations of housings when you have an addict parent, but it's also common for these kids to have to go into foster care or be relocated to a family member. In a news article, they share that places with more addicts, children tend to end up living with relatives or are put into foster care. I'm a prime example of this. When I was 10, I was adopted by my aunt and uncle for a better chance at a stable life and home. Although I've lived here for 9 years now, there were times I stayed in less safe places. Mom, please describe a time where you were forced to take me and stay in an unideal living space.
Well, it was probably when I took you and had to live with my so-called boyfriend at the time. It wasn't a very nice house, and person that I was with was active in his addiction, and I wanted desperately to keep you away from that as much as possible. But at that point, I still wanted to wanted you in my life, so you were along for the ride, even though I didn't really want you to be in that environment. But that was a house that was a squatting house. So it wasn't even like their house, it was a house that they were squatting in.
Now that we've talked about how living conditions can affect a child's life while having an addict parent, let's talk about the direct correlation between having an addict parent and the academic success of their kids. Do you think you would have had a different academic path if you were not raised by an addict?
I do. I feel like had my mom been there for me and had my life not been so chaotic and she would have pushed me more to stay in school, I would have, stayed in school longer and done better.
Now that we've heard that not having a parent fully present in your life can lead to less academic success, I want to talk about a comparison in test scores that was found in a study between two groups. The test scores are of those who are offspring of addicts compared to those who are not. The difference between the two scores are vaguely different and resulted in lower test scores in nearly every subject for the group who were children of addicts. In an Extra Mile Recovery Site article, the specialist in addiction recovery talks about how she and the rest of her recovery team has seen impairment in educational performance as well as developmental delays. Similarly, in a medical journal written by doctors, they state that the cognitive ability is also significantly less in those with parents who have a substance use disorder, also known as SUD. They tested groups of people with and without a parent that had a SUD and compared the various test scores. One of the test results showed a change of negative 0.54 in correlation between overall grades of those with a parent who has a SUD and those who don't. I personally experienced difficulty in school and always have. When I was in kindergarten, I missed over half the school year due to my mom either not being able to or not wanting to wake up and take me to school. Or she would pick me up early to go to her hair or nail appointments. Sometimes I just wouldn't go to school at all if she needed to go somewhere or do something else. When I moved to Minnesota, various test scores were taken to help place me in the correct curriculum level that meets standards, below standards, or above standards. I was below standards in nearly every area. I had to do summer school and work one-on-one with a specialist to help get me up to the standard. Not only are there physical school challenges due to mental inabilities and struggles, there are also mental conditions and behavioral challenges that can occur. Most people struggle with some sort of mental health issue, but it's even more common to have behavioral or mental conditions when you are the child of an addict. This evidently can affect their academic life. In a medical report written by doctors, they state that if you are a child of a parent with an SUD, there's a greater chance for mental concerns such as neglect, depression, anxiety, and more. This can be due to personally experiencing neglect, since the parent is heavily reliant on a substance, or due to worrying about the parent and their well-being. Depression can be caused by many factors when living with an addict parent, for example, feeling alone or unwanted. Other mental issues that can be caused are shared in the Depression and Anxiety Medical Journal, which is also written and produced by many highly educated doctors. In this, they state that PTSD, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder are commonly found amongst those who have parents with a SUD, due to the trauma they may have faced while living in this environment. Trauma doesn't need to be severe or physical to cause PTSD. It comes in many shapes and forms and can be triggered by anything that reminds you of the trauma. This resonates with me since I have a few not so severe PTSD triggers. As I talked about earlier in this podcast, I become hyper aware when I hear a siren. I think that the police are going to take me or take my family away from me. I'm also not a fan of loud sounds like fireworks since it reminds me of times where there would be physical or verbal fights in my household. On that note, I also don't like arguing or screaming when I'm upset or people are upset with me. It causes me to break down and cry like when I would when I was a little girl. For my mother, her PTSD is less sound related. Let's hear what she struggles with. Do you experience any personal PTSD or PTSD triggers in your life?
I'd say yes. I have several of them, and I definitely have PTSD. One in particular is fear of abandonment. I definitely don't like when I feel like people are going to leave me for whatever reason. I will self-sabotage the relationship before they end up doing that, and I will squash the relationship or whatever before they actually have a chance to leave me.
It's clear that she suffered her own form of abandonment in her life, and this has caused her to leave relationships now when she feels she's going to be left, even if that wasn't the case. Throughout the research I shared today, as well as the personal stories from me, Aubrey Bryant, and my mother, Shelley, it's clear that the many effects of having a parent with a substance use disorder can cause there to be challenges in the academic performances of their children. Today we talked about the true commonness of the substance abuse issue and how 1 in 10 children have at least one addict parent. We went over the different housing situations that can occur, like foster care or living with a relative, or simply the unstableness of housing. I shared that there's lower cognitive test scores for these children, as well as the increase of mental disorders and behavioral issues. For example, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and PTSD. We wrapped up by sharing my personal PTSD and my mother's. I would like to thank Shelley for coming on today and sharing her story to help further our knowledge on this topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you guys learned a lot.